get a better understanding of what foraging meant to the producers themselves. Why is it important for them to go out and find fruit in the forested areas or in their backyards, anywhere but a commercial orchard, which would be the easiest thing to do. And how can that tell us something about the kinds of things that are meaningful to people in this community?
It's super interesting, right? Because what is it about these apples that is unique, that's different than what they can buy from a commercial producer? So is it just that they're free? Is it that there is an adventure and a story that they can tell and it helps them to market their product? Or are there really specific chemical attributes to these fruit that they're not getting from their other sources?
We started with this little row of trees that we're standing in front of, and over time we would go, usually in the spring, and pick out some other tree and rescue it. Usually the first year it's just kind of getting the vines out, cutting the brush out from under it, cutting out the dead wood, and then letting it go for a year, and coming back the next year and maybe doing a little pruning and trying to get a little bit of structure to it. Everything we do is spontaneously fermented. You're getting the yeast from the soil where apples have been breaking down for over 100 years here. And I just always feel like you get a little more character out of these old apples, out of foraged apples, than I do out of commercially cultivated apples. You're not going into it with a lot of control. You can exercise control later, but at the time that you're picking what's given to you.
Foraging for plants and fruits and herbs and materials like in the wild is something that was sort of always part of my life, including when I started the business and continuing to this day. And one of the ways that I learn a lot about growing cider apples is by also observing what's happening in uncultivated spaces and just taking cues from it and thinking about how I can incorporate what I see into my management practices in the orchard.
This orchard right here is primarily composed of trees that were grafted from wild seedling trees that I found around here that had properties that I thought would be really good for cider making. I mean, for years we were just planting English and French varieties that we know taste good for cider, but they're not necessarily that well adapted to our region. And so if we can find apples that work as well as those apples for cider, or better, and they're adapted to our local conditions, they might be the next generation cider apples, especially in very low input orchards like this that are organic, and the trees kind of have to fend for themselves a lot more than in a more agriculturally intensive situation.
So on the report cards we included data that we took in the lab from the fruit itself, so like apple size and skin color, and then we also had tasting notes and aroma notes, and then we also included data from leaf samples that were sent to Washington State to learn more about the genetic lineage of the tree itself. And we had images on the report card to show off the flesh and the skin color and seed size.
My higher goal is to make apple orcharding more sustainable than it is. We're already, and as we would suspect, seeing distinct differences between this site in the wild forest, apple forest, and in the managed apple orchard across the creek. And it really talks about the importance of having very local or regionally adapted varieties to help push things along more sustainably. But we're seeing that change by younger people getting into it in a way where it's not so cost prohibitive. And I think that speaks to the value added nature of cider. I think it's the unique genetics of a lot of the lost varieties that we're refinding in this rewilded landscape. And they're not buying into the industrialized commentary of how you should be raising apples.
So foraging to me is, the practice of going out, sort of connecting with the wild, with nature, with your local terroir, being able to sort of, locate apple trees around the area and then evaluate them and see if there's any desirable qualities for cider. I think it's really cool sort of movement that's happening here, because you're able to better represent like the land that you're in, as well as the history of those apples. They have really unique qualities to them.
So the question is it commercially viable? Is it commercially viable to go into the woods and drag this fruit out in backpacks and canvas sacks in pickup trucks down old logging roads? And the answer is we don't really know. We actually, from our first round of genetic tests, it came back that only one out of the first 20 that we looked at was actually a known variety. Every other one was a new seedling. And so that's exciting. That's something different and new that I had not expected out of this research.
I like acid, I like flavor. You know, I'm always chasing flavor. I mean, that's the end goal is flavor, and it can be flavor from the fruit, it can be flavor from, you know, the fermentation, it can be flavor from the aging.
But if it weren't for foraging, I wouldn't have made cider for 10 years and developed this lifestyle of not just making barrels of cider for myself, but introducing people to cider. And so I enjoyed not just drinking it, but sharing it with people.
Making cider is an art, and part of what we're learning and what foragers themselves are learning through this process is how to think more critically about what our landscape is, what its history is, how it's been used, and what our responsibility to it in the future is. And I think that ethos is what sort of starts the whole process that we're looking at in looking at the commercial application of foraging in the cider industry, and the way that those different ways of thinking about making a living creates a zone of a lot of inspiration and innovation.
I think the most surprising thing to me was learning that you could take an apple that is as harsh and unpalatable as a cider apple and turn it into something so delicious.
To go out here, even learn more about this land and how there's potential for these apples, and how it's a really cool growing movement in New York for these foraged apples.
One of the things that's really meaningful to me about cider, like broadly, is that the care and attention that generations and generations and generations and cultures of people, of humans, of my ancestors have put into tending to this really specific relationship with the natural world, their relationship with apples and cider, and what we now have as a result of that, which is, you know, varieties that were selected from the wild and then named and then made and passed on. And I like sort of treasure that lineage and that legacy, and I see myself as getting this opportunity to participate in it and also to carry it forward.
It makes me feel part of the landscape that I'm living in, that I'm interacting with it, yeah, as part of it.